Dude. What is this, the movie Twister?
You can hear the thunder and lightning, right?
Oh, I can hear it.
Good.
That's amazing.
Good.
So yeah, you're not just getting raindrops or hail balls, you're getting pine cones.
It is literally raining pine cones. I will
That's awesome.
I can add a photo in the show notes that shows my front yard littered with pine cones all over the place.
Yeah, that's a new. I mean, talk about leveling up. I mean, the storm systems are taking it to another level.
It's just daughter was grabbing the dog leash and collar and everything to get ready, and then she's like, "Nope." She's like, "Freddie, you better hold it."
Yeah,
because you're not.
You could give Freddie the option. I'm sure Freddie would be like, "Are you crazy?"
Yeah.
I've seen that before. The dog's just like, no, not doing it.
Exactly.
It's a test of the intelligence of the animal.
Exactly. Yeah.
Wow. So I still am always flabbergasted of how much weather, because we just don't get it here. We just don't get any weather. It's starting to get hot again here, so. We had a nice reprieve for a week of some overcast skies, and it was super nice, and now it's back to heating up.
Well, I was in the mid to upper 90s for the most part of the week, and this is just a front moving in.
Mm-hmm.
And then depending on how that hurricane tracks, because I know it's up, I remember living my life when we lived in Florida, when I was growing up in Florida, always watching the Weather Channel and pre-Weather Channel during, basically during the hurricane season months.
Yeah.
So all the way into November, we were always like paying attention to, what's happening now. And now that we've been getting a lot of like residual rain and effects, because I think that, actually it was funny that storm that took out my wife's car, also, it wasn't the tail end of the rain events from the hurricane, but it was like a day after the weather that moved in.
Mm-hmm.
And then it came through. And then last week was another one that we got residual rain in stuff from a tropical storm. So it's just like,
it's so unpredictable.
I thought I moved to get away from all of that stuff, and nope, it's just following me everywhere.
Wow.
You know what I should do is, if you guys really want to like end your drought, I should move there, because apparently it's following me.
It follows you. Yeah. Storm follows Cormac.
Exactly.
Jeez.
Exactly.
It's just one continuous storm. It's just following you around.
It's just, like I move real fast, and he's like, I'll find him.
I remember somebody had a bad attitude, and they're like, "Oh, what's up with you, little black rain cloud?" Like,
yeah, exactly.
Right? That's basically the story of your life, is what you're saying. It's just following you around like the dust cloud follows the was it Pigpen in the Pigpen?
Exactly.
In the Peanuts. Yeah.
Wow. Did you just call me Pigpen?
Yeah. you're that guy.
Nice. Appreciate that.
Yeah. So something that we talked about before, I think we said, hey, let's do this in the next episode, and then a bunch of other stuff got in the way. So I know you're not prepared for this at all, but we talked about this idea of you did a little research, or you got onto a tangent, let's say. I don't know if it was official research or not, but architects that designed automobiles.
Yeah.
I would love to hear about that. I know I brought it up because you're not prepared, but I thought we gotta follow through on this. What the whole idea of design is just coming from other places in architectural kind of day to day, where it's hard to get out of the day to day and get out of the one track mind of designing the project that we're working on right now is real for so many people, right? So I thought it would be a cool, and so if you're not ready, that's fine, but it would be cool to talk about that from a kind of a, you know, it's kind of a motivational thing. It's kind of an inspirational thing, and I assume that's why you did it in the first place.
Well, it was funny is that it actually, I was reading an article about Heatherwick, who,
Who designs
uh,
fabulous stairs?
well, yeah, yes. Well, apparently he had just recently signed a deal with a Chinese manufacturer for kind of a new car, kind of an extension of the way that you live in vehicle form. He designs these beautiful elaborate places and things like that. And what's interesting about it is like, I want to design this as an extension of your life. And I'm looking at what it really is. Is it really sort of just looked like an accessory dwelling unit with wheels, in a
Interesting. I
way.
have not seen
Um,
this, but I would love to.
and I'm taking it to a little bit more extreme than it really is, but, and you've seen concepts like this from automobile manufacturers. So really what he's doing isn't quite new per se,
Sure.
but it's this, the front seats swivel around and you can have basically the center kind of area where the back seat passengers, and you're facing each other, and then it's kind of an autonomous driving, and so that you can basically, kind of like carry your lifestyle from the home to the vehicle and things like that. And I guess, where I was going with that originally, and we talked about numerous things since then, and so I sort of lost the train of thought, but it was always interesting because I think I told the story that at one point in time, and I believe it was like 11th grade, the question was, like, what are you going to do with your life? And I had stood up and I said, you're either going to drive one of my cars or you're going to walk through one of my buildings. And so we know which
Which
route
path?
I took.
Yeah.
However, I was very serious about you drive one of my cars because, I'm, always grew up a car kid,
Hmm.
and always I would get in trouble in school for sketching cars in my textbooks or cars instead of homework and things like that. So I was always drawing cars all the time. And to be quite honest with you, I had this thought in my head that I wanted to go into architecture, but it was one of those paths that I really could have done one or the other
Yeah.
and been equally happy with the choice that I made.
I
And
see so many parallels here. That I was the same way, and I was just talking. I was a guest on another podcast that hasn't come out yet called Construction Disruption, but it was like where did it all start for you? And lots of architects say Lego and whatever, but for me it was drawing, and I was always drawing with grid paper because
yeah,
I wanted to have symmetry. So like when I'm drawing the front view of a car, that's how I
yeah,
learned. That's how I taught myself how to draw, right?
yeah,
And I
yeah,
remember in high school taking that first high school drafting class, and it was kind of multidisciplinary. It wasn't just architectural drafting; it was also mechanical drawing. It was exploded
right.
axonometrics and diagrams and things like that too. But one of the projects that we did in there was an airbrushing project, and I took some of whatever the latest GM or Audi concept car was, and I airbrushed it, and that was a way to basically show off the curves of this vehicle with airbrushing as a medium to show shading, right? And so it was always about cars for me too. And I was 6 years old, and my dad said, "What car is that?" And I could name it on the road. It didn't matter what car it
Oh
was.
yeah,
I knew
yeah,
every car on the road. And so that's why it is so interesting to me about this because I think that we could do with more lectures internally in our offices like this, which is let's talk about car design as another type way to do design, and think about the way that we design compared to that, and just have a great conversation about it, because you can go back to Buckminster Fuller and the Dymaxion car,
oh
right?
yeah,
It's
yeah, yeah, yeah.
so there's, I mean, this is not a new idea, but it's also interesting to kind of see, especially now with things like hashtag van life, right, where people are
Hmm.
living and working and traveling in the same space, um, all over
Yes,
social
yeah.
media. So there's so many ways to go with this topic. I think it's super interesting.
Exactly, because there are some interesting parallels, as you said, with the design sensibilities of an automobile designer versus a architect. We're designing for human habitation. We are designing for, I mean, if you think about it, there's a lot of people who spend a lot of time in their vehicles. And so I was just watching, because it's funny that a lot of people might watch like HGTV to either like, yell at the TV and say, oh, that's not right, or vice versa. Whereas I'm always watching car shows.
Yeah.
I have got a paid subscription to Motor Trend, the streaming channel, and all that other stuff. And I spend most of my time, if I'm watching TV, on that channel. It's cathartic to me, but it also is, a way for me to kind of connect to a design side of me that isn't necessarily, what I get out of architecture, but there is so many similarities. And anyway, so I was watching this one about, Goblin Motor Works is, a British car show. They were talking about this one guy who spends a lot of time in his car. And so they modified his car, put in Wi-Fi, basically, gave this vehicle like creature comforts
Is
that we would.
Exhibit and Pimp My Ride part of this?
It was sort of that. It's, it was, they're kind of like got a new series going out, Goblin Works, mod shop. And so they're modding everybody's cars to, kind of like suit like their lifestyles and stuff. And that was what was interesting about this connection with, the Heatherwick article that I had read. And I'll need to hunt it down. I had, funny enough, I had that tab open for, I believe, about a month that we were going to possibly talk about this thing. And you would, of course, want to bring this up right when I closed out all those tabs.
Yeah, of course.
You must have planned it. You knew this. You planned this.
Well, it's not like you lost power or anything, or had a power ripped from your house.
That's true too. But so it's just interesting to see kind of like these design parallels, and how the interesting thing about that, which also is very similar to like say custom home design, is that you are trying to design down to the very tactile small nub, like a gear shift or a doorknob, the way that the seating is arranged and all of this other stuff. And in some of the very similar thoughts that you have in design of a custom home is very much the same kind of like design aspects. You think about ergonometry, you think about all of the different things that the human will be touching. Mm-hmm. And then you also don't worry about the way the hidden stuff lays out. Like, okay, you see the headlights, but you don't really worry about where the headlights are. And so, you might become this, like how we're trying to hide everything, to
hiding the
just
structure,
worry about the
mechanical.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And hiding in hide everything. We hide the mechanical, hide the structure, hide the electrical. And so we really worry about the aesthetics. And car designers, as somebody who works on his car all the time, apparently they have that same mindset, because you can see where the nice headlights are in my truck. However, they didn't really care about how you got to it, to realize that you have to like remove the shroud in the wheel well, turn the wheel, hopefully that you're contorted enough. And I'm sure we've talked about this story before, but contort your hand to the point where you're, thankfully I'm double jointed, to be able to reach in there and get the light, unclick it out of its harness, pull it out to a point where you can actually like see it and remove it. You can't, there's not enough slack to be able to, move it or anything. And we don't need to go through all this, but what I'm saying is that like some of even like the things about like the hidden aspects of what we do to hide all of the mechanics in ours, they do the same thing. Mm-hmm. They hide the structure, they hide it, so there's so many different parallels. And architects have tried their hands at automotive design all the way through, from Corb. I'm just going to call it the Corb car.
Corb car.
I don't know what it's called. To, you had said Buckminster Fuller. And then, we know that like Zaha had designed what's called the Z car. And then both Heatherwick and Foster, and I didn't know this, had both designed, and apparently, I believe it was Heatherwick who actually won the competition for the London Route Master, the double-decker bus.
Yeah.
There was like a handful of like a couple hundred Heatherwick designed buses out on the London streets until they just I think they just pulled them all, or found out that they weren't that successful. Anyway, I forgot the story about why.
Mm-hmm.
Again, because somebody gave me time to prepare for this conversation,
Yeah.
and it's not like that I didn't have a lot of other things on my mind to
Right.
forget these little details.
But to various
But
levels of success. I mean, this isn't their
but the
main
various
line of work. And we see even
no, but
Apple,
it's
and I know Johnny Ive at Apple, who's no longer the chief design officer there, was very interested in taking what Apple can do to the automobile.
right, right.
Anyway, yeah, there's a lot of examples with industrial designers approaching this problem, but also with architects trying to approach this problem. And I think what architects are also trying to bring to it, besides just the actual kind of tactile interface like you're talking about, but also from a spatial standpoint, because
Yes,
of new
yeah,
technologies like autonomous driving, we're kind of on this precipice of, we're through various levels of testing, and there's 5 different levels of autonomous vehicles, and we're like, level 2 or 3 out of 5, and depending on
right.
where you are, and all kinds of regulation and stuff. But it's going to happen, right? And so
Yes,
now that technology can enable people to work or live during that commute time, because they're not having to focus on the road, you actually can approach this from a spatial standpoint, instead of
yeah.
just the driving experience standpoint. This episode is made possible with support from Twinmotion. Now, you've probably heard of Zaha Hadid Architects. They're one of the world's best-known firms, and when it comes to innovation, they're big fans of pushing boundaries. The team at ZHA has started using Twinmotion, a simple, real-time ArcViz tool that lets you instantly visualize ideas and clearly communicate them to stakeholders. ZHA designer Marco Marghetta says that the benefits of using Twinmotion for the designers are the simplicity of the interface, the playfulness with which you can articulate your scenes, and not having to worry about all the technical aspects that real-time usually brings, like light maps, PBR workflows, and other technical details. Marco also loved Twinmotion Cloud, which lets any member of the team access a project from their web browser without a single download or installation. The project manager can access the model, review it, and immediately give you the feedback anytime from anywhere, says Marco. To download your exclusive free trial, head to twinmotion.link/Archispeak. Again, that's twinmotion.link/Archispeak.
Not to fall too far down a rabbit hole, but you start to think about like the autonomous approach. And so what is the next step for urban design and urban planning, based off of, these autonomous vehicles? I mean, because we basically, if you just look at the evolution of American city planning, we went from agrarian to a lot of like, public spaces, and the front doors all kind of like looked out onto kind of like the village green. And when we did have the evolution to like, okay, everybody had like a horse and buggy, it was more kind of like out of sight, out of mind, more in the backyard. And then you watch this evolution of like the automobile being the dominant mode of transportation. So then all of our architecture and all of our cities kind of morphed around all of that. You
It's
see
very
more
reactive.
of like,
Yeah.
exactly. And so is there an opportunity for us to start to kind of like re-engage that lost social aspect of, kind of like the urban suburban areas, now that the car is going to almost be like, I don't need to park the car in the front yard. I can, like, people are already calling up. I've got a friend who he's absolutely enamored and in love with his being able to use his phone and call up his Tesla. And, it's just like, it kind of like pulls up and all
Summon
this
mode.
other stuff.
Yeah.
Exactly. The summon mode. Thank you.
Yeah.
And so obviously, as we see more and more of that, I mean, do we really honestly need to kind of like gear our whole home towards this? I mean, it seems like it's a truly American, but it isn't, because I've seen it in the Snout House. Do you know that term?
I'm not
right?
familiar with it.
Well, the Snout House is basically the term given to houses that more or less have the garage kind of like the most prominent feature on the house, where it sticks out past everything else, and kind of like your front door is recessed and all that other stuff. And it's
I've never heard that term, but it's kind of like just I immediately thought of outhouse, right?
Yeah,
Because, but
yeah.
yeah, I get what
Well,
you're saying. It's like the snout of an animal. Yep,
exactly,
yep.
exactly. And so, and so would we, be able to design our houses and things like that around all of that? I mean, is there like a central parking garage or something like that where we can put all of our stuff and have like a more socially oriented neighborhood where you park there, you go to your house, and then you decide, oh, hey, I need mice, just dial it up on the phone.
I think there's so many things. There's so much here that I
Oh
actually
yeah,
did
yeah,
a
yeah.
YouTube lecture. I did a lecture and I recorded it, so I put it on my YouTube channel. So I'll put a link to it in the show notes. All about autonomous vehicles and kind of the changes that we could be at the table for in proactively rather than reactively. Because what
Hmm.
I don't want to see us go through again is reacting to non-architectural ideas when it comes to this stuff. So why don't we
Yeah,
have a seat at the table, and guess what? We get to choose us to do that, as getting involved in our cities and our policy to have that seat at the table, so that these ideas about the interface between vehicles and the built environment is smarter. Uh, because otherwise we are going to just be waiting around for them, not that they're evil, but just to make those decisions that we then have to react to, because it's going to change
yeah,
everything.
yeah.
It's going to change the streets, it's going to change sidewalks, it's going to change medians, it's going to change parks, it's going to change highways, it's going to change where people park, like you're talking about,
Oh yeah, yeah, absolutely.
and how people engage with the civic environment. It changes all that. And I think one of the things that I really wanted to drive home in that presentation was that, uh, how many people do you think in your local jurisdiction? That could be a big jurisdiction, it could be a very small one. Like in my hometown of whatever 30,000 people, there might be 3 people working on this, maybe. How many people are working on the autonomous vehicle thing? There's
Mm.
tens of thousands of people working on that
Yeah,
side of the
yeah,
table. And so we will be forced to be in a reactionary mode to that if we don't get involved in those kinds of things now, because thinking about rideshare, thinking about, Elon Musk's 10-year plan, or, his plan to rule the world or whatever, it's like you don't even need to own a car, people. Like, you just need the access to a car. And we're already seeing that with ride sharing apps, and right, where a lot of millennials don't even ever get driver's licenses. They just use the service of vehicles. And while that might
well, I
not
mean,
fit my life, it fits a lot of people's lives. And that changes the size of parking lots, and it changes the entry
yeah.
to buildings. It changes all of this stuff.
I mean, think about this. Think about like the whole rideshare thing, and Uber, and I'll give you an example of. So I live 12 miles from our DC office, and if it were easy for me to be able to get to the metro station from my house, I would actually be working in our DC office rather than our Baltimore office, because the Baltimore office is 43 miles away, and it actually takes me less time to get into the Baltimore office by commuting in by vehicle
By
than it
yourself.
does for
Yep.
me to by myself
Mm-hmm.
than it does for me to try to get from here to the metro station, or for me to drive in.
Mm-hmm.
More so for me to drive in, but still, some of the things are is like, so like think about convenience here. And this is where I'm going with all of this. If you think about the convenience of this, is like right now it's inconvenient for me to try to get on the bus, take that bus to the metro station, take the metro into the office, and then walk to the office, because it's a really short walk from the metro station in DC to our office. We're all talking about convenience here. And it actually takes longer for that whole process than for me to drive into the Baltimore office and then, sit down, open up the computer and get working. Versus, but I could be working on the metro and all that other stuff. So, but the thing is that what would be easier is if I drove to the parking garage at the metro station, but I have to get there really, really early, or all of the spots are gone. So where I'm going with all of this is, could you just imagine if I like, rideshare called up a autonomous vehicle, and it doesn't have to be like this big four-seater thing. It could just be like individual ones, or it could be, a rideshare type thing
Hmm.
that takes me from my house. I call it up and say, hey, I need to go to that, just like Uber, and then take me over there, drop me off there. I hop on the thing, and in this whole time, I'm not having to like stress out like about trying to find a parking space or looking for all of these other things and stuff like that. And basically, I get like a shuttle to like
Yeah.
then my block and a half walk,
Right.
kind of thing.
Right.
And and it could, there's like so many different opportunities, and I know that that just sounded all completely ridiculous, but they're like, just tough it out. Yeah, you're right. I should be, but there's a lot of other things,
There's other
that
pulls
there's
going on there too, like kids in soccer practice and needing to get out, and I get it. Like
exactly, exactly,
it's not an easy,
exactly.
it's not super formulaic. I guess there's a lot of
I
variables.
can I can schedule my time around my vehicle.
Yeah.
I can be very, very precise on how I do things. The thing about it is right now with like the city bus to the metro and everything else, it is very, it is also very schedulable, if those that is a word
Hmm.
anyway.
Hmm.
Um, However, it's also dependent on if somebody doesn't cut off the bus, blah blah blah, whatever.
Sure. Sure.
But that whole length of time is actually longer than my very schedulable vehicle
Mm-hmm.
per session. So,
Well, and I think again, like,
the,
man, this is, we have to think about our buildings that we design as parts
yeah,
of systems.
yes,
Because if
yes,
we don't, man, like you're delivering a building to a client that's going to have a building for, let's just call it, 30 to 50 years, which is sad. But
right,
that's how long it's going to last nowadays, and hopefully longer, but that's probably more like realistic. And they are going to have to interface with this future that we're talking about. We should be having these conversations with them because they are the ones with the resource or the asset or the liability, depending on which way you look at it, that is going to have to respond to that. And so thinking about all of these services that interact with people and space and location and these assets, these buildings, is a much bigger problem set than anybody seems willing to want to take on. But at the same time, it's going to happen whether you do or don't. And so you can either, help them be more prepared for it and provide extra value now, or not, I guess. And most people are choosing not. But there's a huge opportunity here.
so I want to try to talk about a project that I'm working on without actually talking about the project that I'm working on, because I'm not supposed to be talking about the project that I'm working on. However, one of the interesting things about this project, and it's a huge development, we've only got a little part of this big, huge development, in a place that I cannot say. It So one of the interesting things is it does have the actual development itself. There's no vehicles allowed in this development. It's enormous, city size development,
Mm-hmm.
but no vehicles, all pedestrian. And you're like, well, city size, no vehicles. How does that happen? Or, how do you get goods and services in there? How do you
It
do
is
all
a
of this stuff?
solvable problem.
It is an interesting solvable problem. And one of these solvable problems that they are looking at is basically a network of tunnels. And that network of tunnels is a autonomous shuttle system
Mm-hmm.
that interconnects with a series of bus stops throughout the entire development. That, say you're going to, the shopping district or the education district or whatever, you just basically go to the bus stop, you walk down, you get on to this autonomous bus, and it takes you to wherever you need to go. And it also takes you to basically a off-campus parking area if need to. If you're coming from somewhere else and you need to go there, you'll park your vehicle there. You won't drive your vehicle into the development. You will actually get in. You'll hop on the bus and you'll go to wherever it is that you need to go. And there's still this level of dependency on the vehicle right now, and so they are catering to that. but they're also catering to the fact that it's kind of a harsh climate. It actually behooves them to kind of like keep everything kind of like below grade, but it also allows you to be able to move like longer distances by vehicle, but autonomous electric vehicles. And
It also
it just
solves the
it has
delivery problem, right? Because I mean
it
that's another big
it's
one with
solves deliver.
existing
Yes,
cities is you could cut it off to cars and it, but at some points of the day you're still going to have to allow
exactly,
the other
exactly.
stuff to happen.
Yeah, I mean, there's this the conversation of as well. I mean, all of the infrastructure for all of these vehicle dependent cities and things like that are in place, and why not use them by doing that? I mean, you think like New York City was there way before the car was there.
Mm-hmm.
Yet right now, no one can think of New York City without thinking about the traffic, thinking about the cars and all that other stuff and how to get over. But I mean, as you and I have both been to New York City, I mean, I remember you and I deciding to walk between lectures, from one place to another,
Mm-hmm.
because we could actually get there a lot quicker. Or you take public transportation and things
Or a
like that. So
bike,
there
yeah.
are, or a
Bike
bike.
use bike share. I heard that I
Yeah.
never got to do that myself, but I've heard nothing but amazing things about it as one of the best ways to
DC,
get around.
and DC's got a fantastic network of bike trails and things like that that come all the way out to the suburbs. And now that the bike share has not, we had a bike share that was mostly in the city itself, and now it's actually all the way out into the suburbs. So I could hop on a bike, um, ride the trails into DC, and park the bike there, and then like later on when I'm ready to go home, I could hop on the bike, get another bike and ride on home.
Hmm.
So there's a lot of interesting things. I didn't necessarily think you wanted to talk about bikes right now because
Not going there.
yeah,
I
we
think
need to
that
go there, but we won't.
all these problems are solvable if we choose to be a part of solving them. And that to me is kind of the most interesting part about this. And then I don't know how we get back to talking about vehicles and design, but there's some amazing, maybe this is how
Well,
there's
no, but
some
that's
amazing stuff out there going on when it
yeah,
comes to vehicle design right now because of the electrification of vehicles and allowing people to think differently about how they're put together
yes.
and how they're used and how they're modularized into. There's so much interesting work happening in that realm right now, and it seems like a right place for architects and architectural thinking and problem solving to be involved.
Yeah, because as we kind of like started to go down this little rabbit hole of other things, that were separate from the vehicle itself, it's the idea and the notion and the concept of what this electrification, this autonomous vehicle represents is an era of change to not just the way that we think about vehicles, but also the way that those vehicles interact with our daily lives.
Yeah,
And
and
I think
fold into
that's
those
why architects,
services that we're talking about that are
yeah,
all it is a web that is all interconnected. We can't think
yeah.
about these buildings as these standalone things and that never connect to anything on the outside. And I think that is a huge realm of possibility for architects to be a big part of if they want to.
Doesn't it seem weird? And I don't know why this just popped into my head, but think about like the early vehicles in the cities were electric streetcars,
Mm-hmm.
and now they went away, and then we just like inundated the entire infrastructure with the internal combustion vehicle, and now we're coming back to an electrified form of transportation.
Yeah,
It's just
but personalized.
it's
Yeah. It
but
is interesting to
personalized.
see that kind of loop back, but be a different formula, a different formulation of it, because it is all
Uh,
about like people owning these things, and honestly, I think there's such a huge opportunity to look at this so differently as a service. It doesn't solve everybody's problem for every possibility, but it solves a lot of people's problem for a big range of the use cases out there that should be seriously considered moving forward. It's just so hard to kind of think of things from a new approach when you've been around for so long and have this experience, and you don't really think of it as a new opportunity. You think of it as like this newfangled thing that's getting in the way of the way that I'm used to doing things. It's kind of
Exactly. Yeah.
kind of what it always comes back to in architecture.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly.
uh, landing on a sad note. Wah wah.
Mm.
Stuck the
Yeah.
landing.
Judges give you a 9.5
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. I'll take it.
out of 100, but whatever. Oh.
Oh, ouch.